The game nobody told you was being played. What if everything you believed about human behavior was built on a foundation of sand? What if the people sitting across from you at the dinner table, the colleague who always seems one step ahead, the friend who effortlessly gets what they want, what if all of them are operating according to invisible rules that nobody ever taught you? Here is the uncomfortable truth that changes everything once you hear it. Human beings are not rational. We are not the logical, evidence-driven decision-makers we love to believe we are. We are biological creatures running ancient software in a modern world, and that software was never updated to match the complexity of the life we're actually living. Neuroscience has ripped the curtain back on something that most people will spend their entire lives never knowing. Your brain makes its decisions before you do. The emotional, subconscious centers deep inside your skull have already chosen, already reacted, already committed. By the time your conscious mind shows up and starts crafting a story to explain why the choice was logical, think about what that really means. Every single person you interact with today, your boss, your partner, the stranger on the subway, the customer on the other end of the call, is being silently steered by psychological forces they cannot see and would deny if you pointed them out. They believe they are in control. They are not, and neither are you, not yet. But that is exactly why you're here. This is not a book about manipulation. It is not a manual for exploiting people or bending others to your will through tricks and deception. This is a book about seeing clearly. It is about developing the kind of psychological awareness that the most effective leaders, communicators, negotiators, and human beings on Earth have quietly cultivated for decades while everyone else remained asleep at the wheel. The most influential people in any room are not necessarily the loudest, the richest, or the most credentialed. They are the ones who understand what is actually happening beneath the surface of every conversation. They know why people resist change even when change would save them. They understand why logic rarely changes a mind, but emotion changes it instantly. They can read the room before the first word is spoken, and they know how to guide an interaction toward an outcome that works for everyone involved. That level of awareness is not magic. It is not a gift that some people are born with and others are denied. It is a learnable skill set built on well-documented principles of human psychology and behavioral science. And by the time you finish this book, you will have it. You will stop being confused by the people around you. You will stop taking reactions personally. You will stop being outmaneuvered in conversations and negotiations and relationships because you finally understand the invisible game being played. And you understand how to play it with both skill and integrity. But here is what you need to know before we begin. This material is not comfortable. It will challenge the story you have been telling yourself about who you are and why you do what you do. It will ask you to look honestly at the gap between your conscious intentions and your unconscious behavior. It will require you to sit with some truths that are far more interesting than the lies we have all been told about human nature. If you are ready for that, if you are genuinely ready to step into a level of self-awareness and social mastery that most people never even know is available, then let's go. Because once you see the patterns, you cannot unsee them. And once you understand them, your life will never look the same again. The illusion of rational behavior. There is a story we all tell ourselves. It goes something like this. I am a reasonable person. I look at the facts. I weigh my options. I make thoughtful decisions based on logic and evidence. It is one of the most comforting stories a human being can tell. It is also almost entirely false. Here is what neuroscientists discovered when they started looking inside the brain during actual decision-making, using advanced imaging technology that tracks blood flow and electrical activity in real time. Researchers found something that overturned decades of assumptions about human cognition. The emotional centers of the brain, specifically the limbic system, initiate decisions up to 7 seconds before the conscious mind registers that a decision is even being made. 7 seconds. That means when you believe you are thinking something through, when you feel the internal sensation of deliberation, you are almost certainly rationalizing a conclusion your unconscious mind already reached. Your conscious brain did not make the decision. It was handed the decision and asked to write the press release. Consider a moment from your own life. Maybe it was a career change you convinced yourself was purely practical. Maybe it was a relationship you stayed in long past its expiration date. Build in elaborate justifications for why the timing wasn't right to leave. Maybe it was a purchase you talked yourself into with careful reasoning that felt airtight at the time. If you look closely at any of those moments, you will likely find that the feeling came first and the logic came second. Always. This is not a character flaw. It is not weakness or stupidity. It is the operating system of every human brain that has ever existed on this planet. Understanding this does not diminish you. It liberates you because it reveals something extraordinary. If you want to understand people, including yourself, you have to stop studying what people say and start studying what they feel. There are 3 hidden psychological systems that silently govern the behavior of every person you will ever meet. The survival system is the most ancient layer of human psychology. Its job description has not changed in 200,000 years. Keep the organism alive. It does not care about your 5-year plan. It does not care about your performance review or your social media presence. It cares about threats, real ones, imagined ones, symbolic ones. When someone resists feedback that would genuinely help them grow, when a colleague sabotages a promotion opportunity out of fear, when a person stays in a damaging situation because change feels more dangerous than staying, they are being governed by the survival system. It runs entirely below the surface of conscious thought, but it drives more of what you see in human behavior than any other force. The social system emerged from millions of years of tribal living. Human survival depended not on individual strength, but on belonging. Being accepted by the group meant resources, protection, reproduction. Being cast out meant death. That ancient operating code is still running inside every person you meet. When intelligent adults go along with group decisions they privately think are wrong, when people spend money they do not have on things that signal status, when someone endures a toxic workplace because leaving feels like social exile, they are not being irrational. They are being perfectly rational within the logic of a social brain that evolved when belonging was survival. The meaning-making system is perhaps the most fascinating of the 3. The human mind cannot tolerate randomness. It must create coherent narratives that explain the world. When something happens, your brain does not observe it neutrally. It interprets it immediately and automatically, through the lens of everything you have already experienced and believed. 2 people watch the same event unfold in real time and will walk away with genuinely different memories of what occurred, not because one of them is lying, but because their meaning-making systems process the same input through different filters and produce different outputs. These 3 systems are not problems to be solved. They are not bugs in your psychology. They are features that served our species extraordinarily well for most of human history. But in the modern world, these ancient systems are constantly being triggered by situations they were never designed to handle. A critical email from a manager activates the same threat response as a predator on the savannah. A social media comment that challenges your opinion sends the same alarm through your social brain as tribal rejection. A random setback at work gets woven into a sweeping story about your worth and your future. The moment you understand this, something shifts. You stop taking people's emotional reactions personally because you realize those reactions are almost never actually about you. They are about the ancient systems firing inside the other person's nervous system. You stop being baffled by behavior that seems irrational because you can now see the hidden logic behind it. And most powerfully, you start to develop the capacity to pause between stimulus and response in your own life, which is where all real freedom lives. The greatest psychological insight you can carry into every human interaction is this: logic is not what moves people. Emotion is what moves people. Logic is what people use afterward to explain why they were moved. If you lead with facts and data and rational arguments, you are speaking to the smallest and least powerful part of the human decision-making system. If you lead with understanding, connection, and emotional resonance, you are speaking to the part that actually determines what happens next. This is the foundation on which everything else in this book is built. The 6 invisible forces behind every decision. Nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, "Today I will be irrationally controlled by unconscious psychological forces." And yet, by the end of the day, every single person on earth has been steered multiple times by exactly that. There are 6 specific forces that operate beneath conscious awareness to determine what people choose, what they avoid, who they trust, what they buy, who they follow, and what they believe. These forces are not theoretical. They are biological. They are measurable. And once you understand them, you will see them everywhere. The first force, social proof. Human beings are wired at a neurological level to monitor what others are doing and use that information as a guide for their own behavior. In uncertain situations, which describes most of the modern world, the brain's default setting is to scan the environment for behavioral cues from others and follow them. This is not sheep-like stupidity. It is an elegant cognitive shortcut that works remarkably well when most people in a situation have access to good information. But it can be triggered artificially, and it frequently is. Busy restaurants are perceived as better than empty ones. Books on bestseller lists sell more copies because they are on bestseller lists. People tip in a jar that already has money in it more readily than they tip in an empty one. When a speaker asks an audience if anyone has heard of a concept and several hands go up, the remaining audience immediately recalibrates toward accepting the concept as credible. None of these responses involve conscious analysis. They are all automatic social proof calculations running in the background of the brain. Understanding social proof means understanding that the most persuasive thing you can often say is not, "I think this is a good idea, but here is who else is already doing this, and here is what happened when they did." The second force, authority. The human brain is wired to defer to perceived expertise. This programming exists because in ancestral environments, ignoring the guidance of experienced elders or skilled hunters was genuinely dangerous. Following authority usually worked. The instinct to defer was selected for because it improved survival odds. In the modern world, this instinct fires on anything that resembles an authority signal, whether or not genuine expertise backs it up. A white coat increases compliance with medical advice, regardless of whether the person wearing it is a doctor. Confident body language and a measured speaking pace cause people to assign higher credibility to whatever is being said. Credentials listed before a presentation shift how the audience evaluates the content, even when those credentials are in unrelated fields. This is not a vulnerability to be ashamed of. It is important information. It means that how you position yourself and your ideas matters enormously, not because you are trying to deceive anyone, but because human beings are designed to ask, should I listen to this person? Before they ask, is what this person's saying true? The third force, reciprocity. Across every human culture ever studied, the obligation to return a favor is one of the most deeply embedded social norms in existence. When someone gives you something, your brain activates a psychological accounting system that registers a debt. The compulsion to repay that debt can override logical analysis, prior preferences, and even explicit intention. Free samples in grocery stores increase purchase rates, not because the sample is large enough to satisfy the consumer, but because receiving it activates the reciprocity system. The small gift creates a disproportionate psychological obligation. Political. Candidates shake hands, attend community barbecues, and kiss babies because human beings are primed to feel favorable toward people who have done something for them, even symbolically. The ethical application of reciprocity is straightforward and powerful. Provide genuine value, freely and without explicit expectation of return, before you ever make a request, not as a calculated transaction, but as a habit of generosity that builds genuine goodwill over time. The returns on consistent generosity compound in ways that no negotiation tactic ever could. The fourth force, consistency. Once a person takes a public position, makes a commitment, or identifies with a particular viewpoint, the brain creates powerful psychological momentum toward maintaining that position. Changing course requires not just updating a belief, but renegotiating an identity. And identity protection is one of the strongest forces in human psychology. This is why people defend choices they privately regret, why they double down on strategies that clearly are not working, why they remain in situations that stopped serving them years ago. The cost of admitting a mistake is not just informational, it is existential. It threatens the coherent story the mind has built about who this person is. The practical insight is this: small commitments create pathways to larger commitments. When someone agrees to something minor that is aligned with a larger goal you want them to pursue, they have created an internal narrative that makes the larger goal feel consistent with who they are. Change the small story first, and the larger behavior often follows. The fifth force, scarcity. The brain assigns higher value to things that are rare, limited, or in danger of disappearing. This is evolutionary logic. In an environment where resources were genuinely scarce, the ability to quickly prioritize and pursue limited opportunities was a survival advantage. In the modern world, this instinct fires on manufactured scarcity with the same intensity it fires on real scarcity. Limited time offer is not just a marketing phrase. It is a neurological activation code. When something might disappear, the brain stops evaluating whether we actually want it and starts calculating how badly we will feel if we miss it. Loss aversion, the tendency to weight potential losses roughly twice as heavily as equivalent gains, is one of the most replicated findings in all of behavioral science. The ethical insight here is not to manufacture false scarcity. It is to communicate genuine constraints honestly, and to understand that framing matters. This is what you could gain, and this is what you risk losing by waiting. Describe identical situations and produce dramatically different levels of motivation. The sixth force, likability. All of the other forces become significantly more powerful when they operate through someone you like. Conversely, even logically superior arguments struggle to land when delivered by someone you find irritating or untrustworthy. The brain's first question in any interaction is not, "Is this information accurate?" It is, "Is this person safe?" Likability is not random chemistry. It is a predictable output of specific inputs. People like those who seem similar to them in values and background. People like those who make them feel genuinely seen and understood. People like those who are associated with positive experiences. People like those who seem genuinely interested in them rather than performing interest for ulterior motives. None of this is manipulation. It is emotional intelligence applied to communication, and it is the foundation of every meaningful human connection. Master these 6 forces, not to exploit them, but to understand them, and you will never be surprised by a human decision again. Reading the hidden language words are the smallest part of what a human being communicates. In any interaction, your brain is processing a continuous stream of nonverbal information. The micro-tension in someone's jaw, the barely perceptible lean away from a question they do not want to answer, the split-second expression that crossed a face before the socially acceptable one was assembled and presented. Most people absorb this information unconsciously and experience it as a vague feeling. Something seemed off. I'm not sure I believed them. The room felt weird. Learning to read this hidden language consciously is like upgrading from vague feelings to high-definition data. The human face contains more than 40 distinct muscle groups capable of producing thousands of unique expressions. Many of these expressions are involuntary and universal. They occur the same way in a boardroom in Chicago, a village in rural Kenya, and a fishing community in Southeast Asia, because they are not cultural conventions. They are biological outputs. When the emotional brain registers an experience, the face expresses it automatically, usually before the conscious mind can intercept. These involuntary expressions, often lasting only a fraction of a second, are called micro-expressions. They include happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, contempt, and surprise. Among these, contempt is particularly valuable to recognize. A flash of contempt, one corner of the lip briefly pulling upward and back, lasting less than 1/10 of a second, tells you more about how someone truly regards a proposal, a person, or an idea than 10 minutes of polite conversation. When someone's words and their micro-expressions are telling different stories, the micro-expressions are almost always closer to the truth. The body tells the same story on a larger scale. Confidence expands the physical form. High-status individuals in relaxed social environments naturally take up more space. Their posture opens. Their movements are deliberate rather than hurried, and they do not flinch from eye contact. Individuals experiencing psychological threat or low social confidence do the opposite. The body contracts. Arms cross or come toward the chest. Shoulders round. Touch, self-soothing behaviors like rubbing the back of the neck or touching the face increase. Deception produces its own consistent physical signature, and it is less about avoiding eye contact than most people believe. Practiced liars can maintain eye contact. What they cannot easily suppress is the body's instinct to create distance from the lie. They tend to lean backward or shift their weight away. They create physical barriers, perhaps pulling a coffee cup or a notebook between themselves and the person they are speaking to. Their movements become smaller and more controlled because managing the deception requires cognitive resources that would ordinarily be allocated to natural, unconsidered movement. The moments of highest information density are transitions, when the subject of a conversation shifts, when an unexpected question lands, when someone is asked about something they have been carefully avoiding. The body and face briefly lose their managed presentation and reveal what is actually underneath. A good observer is not focused on the performance. They are watching for the moments when the performance slips. voice carries its own parallel communication channel. The pitch, pace, resonance, and tension of someone's voice change continuously in response to emotional state, stress level, and the degree of authenticity in what is being expressed. Stress pushes vocal pitch upward and increases speaking pace. Genuine confidence produces a slower, lower, more resonant tone. The voice of someone who is being careful, who is managing what they are saying rather than simply expressing it, tends to become flatter and more controlled, with longer pauses and unusually precise word selection. The most reliable vocal signal is incongruence between content and delivery. Someone who says they are excited in a flat, careful voice. Someone who claims certainty while their voice carries a slight, involuntary tremor. Someone who insists on a feeling while every tonal indicator points elsewhere. In these moments, the content is the performance and the voice is the truth. Learning to read these signals does not turn you into a human lie detector. Human communication is too complex and context-dependent for that level of certainty. What it does is give you access to a much richer stream of information than the words alone provide, and it allows you to ask better questions, make more accurate observations, and respond to what is actually happening in an interaction, rather than just what is being presented. The psychology of influence and persuasion. Most people think persuasion is about building a better argument. They spend hours preparing data, crafting compelling cases, arranging their points in logical sequence, ready to convince. And then they walk into the conversation and discover that none of it is working. The other person is not engaging with the logic. They are resisting it, deflecting it, dismissing it. And the more evidence gets piled on, the more entrenched they become. This experience is so common, it should be the first lesson in every communication course. It almost never is. The reason rational arguments so frequently fail to change minds is that rational arguments are aimed at the wrong part of the brain. They address the conscious, analytical layer that arrives late to the decision and leaves early. Real influence works at the level where decisions are actually made, in the unconscious, emotional pattern-matching systems that respond not to data but to meaning, safety, and identity. The foundation of all genuine influence is trust, but not trust in the moral sense that most people immediately think of. Trust, in the neurological sense, is the experience of feeling safe with someone. When the unconscious mind classifies a person as non-threatening, predictable, and aligned with your interests, it lowers its defenses. When those defenses are down, information flows differently. New ideas land in a different register. Requests carry a different weight. Trust is built through three specific mechanisms. Similarity is the first. The brain is primed to extend trust to people who seem like members of the same tribe, and similarity is the primary tribal signal. This does not have to be demographic. Far more powerful is behavioral and philosophical similarity. When you communicate in a way that mirrors someone's natural style, when your expressed values resonate with theirs, when your emotional register matches the room they are in, you activate deep tribal recognition circuits that lower resistance before a single, substantive word has been exchanged. Consistency is the second mechanism. Trust is not built through extraordinary moments. It is built through ordinary moments, repeated reliably over time. When you say you will do something and then do it. When you show up prepared when preparation was expected. When your behavior on an ordinary Tuesday reflects the same values you expressed in a high-stakes conversation last month. Inconsistency, even small inconsistency, does not produce neutral reactions. It triggers threat detection because unpredictability is the signature of danger. Demonstrated competence is the third mechanism. People extend trust to those who have shown they can deliver results in domains that matter. This competence does not need to be in the exact area where influence is being sought, but it does need to be visible and genuinely relevant to the relationship. An established track record creates a form of trust that no amount of charm or persuasion can replicate. Once trust is established, the most powerful tool of influence becomes available. Reframing. Every situation exists within a frame, a mental context that determines its emotional meaning. Change the frame without changing the facts, and you change how people feel about the situation, which changes what they are likely to do. When someone is reluctant to take action because they perceive it as a risk, a reframe might position the same action as the risk-reducing choice compared to inaction. When someone feels that agreeing with you would mean abandoning a previous position, a reframe might show how your proposal is actually consistent with the values underlying their previous position. The key to effective reframing is that it cannot be perceived as a spin or a trick. It must be genuinely true, just illuminating a dimension of the truth that was previously obscured. Psychological ownership is another profound influence principle. When people feel they participated in developing an idea, they become its advocates rather than its audience. They have skin in the game. Their identity is invested in the outcome. The way to create this ownership is not to present solutions, but to ask questions that guide someone toward discovering the solution themselves. This requires genuine curiosity, patience, and the discipline to let someone arrive at a conclusion on their own journey, rather than delivering it to them efficiently. Finally, influence is deeply time-sensitive. The same request made in two different emotional contexts can produce completely opposite responses. People are more open when they feel respected and psychologically safe, when they are not under time pressure, when their core identity is not feeling challenged, and when the person making the request has made deposits in the relationship before drawing from it. The most ethical and sustainable form of influence is what could be called aligned persuasion. You are only genuinely trying to move people toward outcomes that serve their interests as well as your own. When your influence is genuinely aligned with someone's real interests, their unconscious mind becomes your partner. They want to be persuaded because being persuaded serves them. Advanced behavioral prediction. Understanding what someone is doing right now is useful. Predicting what they will do next is transformative. Behavioral prediction is not mysticism. It is the systematic application of pattern recognition to the observable and verifiable fact that human beings are far more consistent than they believe themselves to be. The same person who insisted they were different after the last conflict will respond to the next similar conflict in a strikingly similar way. The same person who found a reason not to commit to a difficult goal last year will find a structurally identical reason this year. The contexts change. The patterns repeat. The first dimension of behavioral prediction involves understanding someone's primary psychological drivers. Every person is motivated by a combination of fundamental needs, but those needs are not weighted equally. Security, significance, variety, connection, growth, contribution. One or two of these will dominate the hierarchy, and that hierarchy will show up consistently across decisions, reactions, and choices across every domain of a person's life. A person for whom security sits at the top of that hierarchy will make career decisions, relationship choices, and financial moves that consistently prioritize preservation over opportunity. They will tolerate frustration to avoid the uncertainty of change. They will resist innovations that are objectively superior if those innovations require releasing what they currently have. When you identify security as someone's primary driver, you hold the key to predicting their behavior in virtually any situation that involves uncertainty or risk. A person whose primary driver is significance will make choices that consistently prioritize recognition and impact. They will take risks that a security-driven person would never entertain, not because they are reckless, but because the potential for acknowledgement outweighs the potential for loss in their psychological accounting. They will be fiercely loyal to those who make them feel seen and quietly devastating to those who dismiss or minimize them. The second dimension is stress response patterns. Every person has a signature way of responding when they feel threatened, overwhelmed, or under intense pressure. Some become more directive, tightening their grip on control as a way of managing the anxiety of uncertainty. Some become more collaborative, pulling others into the problem as a way of distributing the emotional weight. Some withdraw and analyze, processing internally before engaging externally. Some externalize, talking through the problem out loud with anyone available. What makes stress responses so valuable for prediction is that they are among the most stable and least context-dependent aspects of personality. People can adapt their behavior significantly across different social contexts, but under real pressure, the mask comes off and the signature pattern emerges. When you know how someone responds to stress, you know something essential about their architecture that their normal social presentation often conceals. The third dimension is cognitive biases and decision-making shortcuts. Every human mind takes shortcuts. This is not a flaw. It is a necessity. The volume of information available to process at any moment is incomprehensible, and the brain must filter aggressively. The problem is that the filters are not neutral. They are shaped by prior experience, current emotional state, and deep-seated beliefs, and they introduce predictable distortions. Someone with a strong confirmation bias will seek information that supports existing beliefs and discount, minimize, or avoid information that challenges them. Once you recognize this pattern, you can predict that presenting them with contradictory evidence will not change their mind. It will entrench it. The more effective approach is to find ways to present new information as extending or completing their existing worldview, rather than contradicting it. Someone with a strong availability bias will consistently overweight information that is vivid, recent, or personally experienced, and underweight abstract statistical information. For this person, a single powerful story carries more persuasive weight than volumes of data. Once you know this, you can present information in whatever format actually reaches them, rather than the format that seems most rational to you. The fourth dimension is values hierarchy. Beneath behavior and emotion lies a layer of deeply held values that function as the operating principles of a person's decision-making. When competing priorities create genuine conflict, the values hierarchy determines which way the choice goes. Understanding someone's hierarchy allows you to predict the outcome of difficult decisions they have not yet made, because you understand the internal judge that will decide them. The fifth dimension is relational patterns. How someone relates to authority figures, to peers, to subordinates, to strangers, tends to be remarkably consistent across contexts and relationships. Someone who unconsciously seeks approval from authority figures will modify their behavior, their expressed opinions, even their apparent values, in the presence of people they perceive as high status. Someone who unconsciously resists authority will find a reason to push back against almost any directive, regardless of its merit, because compliance itself feels like a threat to autonomy. When you hold all 5 dimensions simultaneously, you develop a model of a person that is accurate enough to predict behavior in situations you have never directly observed. This is the practical meaning of truly knowing someone. The psychology of emotional control. Here is something that will change how you understand your own mind. You did not choose your last emotion. You did not decide to feel anxious before the difficult conversation, or frustrated by the slow driver ahead of you, or strangely sad on what should have been a good day. Those emotions arrived. They happened to you. And for most people, that is where the story ends. Emotions are visitors. They come uninvited, they do what they want, and they leave when they feel like it. This experience is universal. The belief that it is inevitable is a mistake. Neuroscience has revealed something that changes the picture entirely. Emotions are predictions. Your brain is not a passive receiver of reality. It is an active prediction machine, constantly generating a model of the world based on past experience and comparing incoming information against that model. Emotions are not reactions to events. They are the felt experience of your brain's prediction about what those events mean. When your brain's prediction and reality match, you feel settled, in control, at ease. When they diverge, you feel the friction of that mismatch. Anxiety, frustration, confusion, unease. These are not just responses to the world. They are signals that your predictive model needs updating. Once you understand this, emotional control stops being about suppression or performance and starts being about something more interesting: recalibration. When a negative emotion arises, the question is not, how do I stop feeling this? But, what prediction did my brain make that reality is contradicting, and is that prediction accurate? This inquiry does not eliminate the emotion, but it changes your relationship to it fundamentally. You move from being inside the emotion to standing next to it, which is where the possibility of choice lives. Every emotion also has a physiological signature, a specific pattern of physical changes in the body that accompany and partially constitute the emotional experience. Anger increases heart rate, contracts the jaw, floods the bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. Anxiety produces shallow upper chest breathing, heightened peripheral awareness, and a restless sense of urgency. Fear creates stillness in the body and hyper-focused attention. These physiological signatures are bidirectional. The emotion produces the physiology, but the physiology also sustains and amplifies the emotion. If you change the physiology, you change the emotional trajectory. The single most powerful physiological lever available to you is breathing. Slow, deep breaths with extended exhales, specifically the kind that activate the diaphragm and trigger the parasympathetic nervous system, interrupt the physiological cascade of stress and anxiety with a consistency that has been documented across hundreds of controlled studies. It is not a technique for the faint-hearted or the spiritual. It is basic neuroscience applied to the body's operating system. Beyond regulation lies strategic emotional positioning, one of the most underappreciated skills in high performance. Different emotional states create different cognitive capabilities. Positive emotions, especially curiosity and genuine enthusiasm, broaden attention and facilitate creative and associative thinking. Calm, focused states narrow attention and enhance precision and analytical depth. Confident emotional states project authority and reduce unconscious resistance in others. The most psychologically sophisticated people do not simply experience emotions. They cultivate the emotional state that best serves the specific challenge in front of them. This is not inauthenticity. It is mastery. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of emotional intelligence is what researchers call emotional contagion. Human beings are wired with mirror neurons that automatically and involuntarily synchronize with the emotional states of people in close proximity. Most people are completely unaware of this process. They absorb the emotional atmosphere of a room without knowing it and mistake the absorbed emotions for their own. When you understand emotional contagion, you can flip the dynamic. Instead of being pulled into the emotional register of others, You can establish the emotional tone of an interaction consciously and let others calibrate to you. A person who remains genuinely calm in a room full of tension is not just modeling composure, they are actively restructuring the emotional environment. This is leadership at its most fundamental level. Mental manipulation, defense systems. You are being manipulated right now, not by this book, not by the person next to you probably, but by systems, by some individuals, and by dynamics you have never been taught to recognize. Every day, sophisticated attempts are made to bypass your rational decision-making, override your genuine preferences, and guide your choices toward outcomes that serve someone else's interests rather than your own. Most of these attempts succeed, not because you are naive, but because you have not been given the tools to recognize them. The first and most common manipulation technique is artificial urgency. Manipulators understand that time pressure degrades decision quality. When you are rushing, you rely on emotional instincts rather than careful analysis. You act to escape the discomfort of the pressure rather than in service of your own interests. This offer expires tonight. I need a decision by the end of the call. If you wait, you will miss this window. The defense is absolute. Whenever you feel pressured to make a consequential decision quickly, do not invoke a mandatory waiting period. Tell the person you need time to consider and stick to that boundary. Legitimate opportunities do not dissolve because you think before you commit. Manipulative opportunities are specifically designed to evaporate under scrutiny, which is exactly why the pressure is there to prevent the scrutiny from happening. The second technique is guilt and emotional obligation. The manipulative use of guilt involves making you feel responsible for another person's emotional state, their circumstances, or their choices. After everything I have done, I thought you were different. You are being selfish. These phrases are designed to activate your empathy and turn it against your judgment. The critical distinction is between genuine accountability and manufactured obligation. You are responsible for your own choices and their direct consequences. You are not responsible for managing other people's emotions, protecting them from the natural results of their own decisions, or sacrificing your own well-being to stabilize someone else's psychological state. When someone routinely makes you feel guilty for having boundaries, that guilt is information about them, not about you. The third technique is gaslighting, one of the most psychologically damaging forms of manipulation because it attacks your confidence in your own perceptions. Gaslighting involves telling you that things you clearly remember did not happen, that your emotional responses are disproportionate or irrational, or that your interpretation of events is distorted. Over time, consistent gaslighting erodes trust in one's own mind in ways that can take years to repair. The defense is documentation and grounding. Keep records of significant conversations and agreements. Trust your own perceptions unless presented with compelling specific evidence to the contrary. Notice if someone consistently responds to your concerns by questioning your memory or your sanity, rather than engaging with the substance of what you have raised. The fourth technique is intermittent reinforcement, often called love bombing, followed by withdrawal. This pattern creates an addiction-like psychological dynamic. Intense positive attention, warmth, praise, and special treatment are followed by sudden coldness, criticism, or absence. The unpredictability creates a compulsive cycle in which you work increasingly hard to recapture the initial positive experience. Genuine care and regard develop gradually and maintain reasonable consistency. When someone's warmth toward you fluctuates dramatically and unpredictably, that volatility is a warning sign, not a feature of passionate connection. The fifth technique is isolation and dependency. Manipulators systematically undermine the other relationships in your life. Your friendships are questioned. Your family members are subtly criticized. Your independent activities are discouraged. Over time, the manipulator positions themselves as your primary or only source of validation, perspective, and support. Dependency created this way serves control rather than connection. The defense is simple, but requires active maintenance. Preserve diverse relationships across all areas of your life, regardless of what any single person in your life prefers. Anyone who consistently works to reduce your connections to others is working to reduce your options. Reduced options serve them, not you. The final tool in a sophisticated defense system is manipulation radar, the calibrated ability to recognize manipulation attempts through their felt quality rather than only through their explicit content. Manipulation attempts produce specific emotional signatures, a sense of artificial urgency that seems disproportionate to the actual stakes, confusion about your own perceptions, guilt that arises without clear, proportionate cause, and a subtle sense that your worth or loyalty is being evaluated and found wanting. When you notice these emotional signatures during an interaction, regardless of the surface content of the conversation, slow down. Ask more questions. Make no decisions until the pressure subsides. Your instincts, when they have been educated and practiced, are not enemies of reason. They are reason operating at speeds faster than conscious articulation. The architecture of persuasive communication. Most people approach communication as a delivery system. They think about what they want to say, organize it as clearly as possible, and present it. Then they wait for the response. If the response is not what they hope for, they conclude that their argument was not strong enough and build a better one. This is the wrong model, and it is the source of nearly every communication failure in every domain. Real persuasive communication is not a delivery system. It is a design process. You are not packaging and transporting your ideas. You are architecting an experience in another person's mind, one that creates the conditions under which new information can be genuinely received, processed, and integrated, rather than simply heard and dismissed. The human brain processes incoming communication in a specific sequence. First, it evaluates, is this person friend or foe? Then it asks, is this relevant to me right now? Then it checks, does this align with or threaten my existing beliefs? Only after passing through these three filters does the brain engage with the logical content of the message. Most communicators begin at the end of this sequence and never address the beginning. The first architectural element is psychological safety. Before anyone will truly open to your communication, their threat detection systems must be disengaged. This happens through specific signals. You demonstrate that you understand their perspective before presenting your own. You acknowledge complexity rather than bulldozing through it. You communicate in a style and register that matches their natural mode. You make clear through behavior, not words, that your goal is a good outcome for both parties, not a victory for yourself. Psychological safety is destroyed with remarkable ease. Interrupting someone in a moment of genuine expression, presenting your position in a way that implicitly makes their current position seem foolish, using language that signals superiority or condescension, connecting their identity to the position you are asking them to abandon. Any of these triggers threat detection and closes down the kind of genuine cognitive openness that real communication requires. The second element is relevance. You must connect your message to something the other person already cares about before they will invest genuine attention in it. Not the version of what they should care about according to you, but the actual live priorities, fears, and aspirations that drive their daily experience. When someone feels that your message speaks directly to something that actually matters to them, they lean in. When they feel that your message is yours to give and theirs to receive, they politely hear it and privately file it away. The third element is the belief bridge. Direct challenges to existing beliefs produce entrenchment, not openness. The brain protects its models of reality with something that functions very much like an immune system. Foreign material is identified and expelled. The way to introduce genuinely new information is not through the front door, but through the side door. Find the genuine points of connection between what someone already believes and what you want them to consider, and build from there. New ideas that feel like extensions of existing beliefs land completely differently than new ideas that feel like attacks on them. The fourth element is emotional resonance. Information that connects to feeling is retained, integrated, and acted upon. Information that remains purely abstract is processed and released. The emotions that carry the most persuasive freight are not happiness or excitement, but the deeper identity-relevant emotions. Pride, the fear of meaningful loss, the desire to matter, the need for one's choices to make sense. When your message connects to these layers, it becomes personally important rather than theoretically interesting. The fifth element is social proof integration. Because the human brain treats widespread behavior as a signal of appropriate behavior, messages that include genuine examples of similar people who have already made the same choice are inherently more persuasive than messages that stand on logic alone. The key variable is similarity. Social proof from people who seem fundamentally different from your audience actually reduces persuasion because it suggests the message was designed for someone else. The sixth element is clear implementation pathway. Even genuine agreement rarely translates into action unless the path from decision to first step is absolutely unambiguous. Vague encouragement to think it over or consider making a change places the entire burden of translating intention into action on the other person. That burden, combined with the natural friction of inertia, is what prevents most good intentions from ever becoming behavior. A specific, achievable, clearly described next step removes that friction. Advanced social dynamics and power psychology. In every room you enter, in every meeting, conversation, and gathering, there is an invisible architecture of power and status that is operating continuously and that almost no one is consciously tracking. This architecture determines whose ideas get taken seriously, who speaks first and who defers, whose discomfort gets addressed and whose gets ignored, who walks away feeling energized and who walks away feeling subtly diminished. It is not determined by job titles or organizational charts, though those can influence it. It is determined by psychological positioning, and it can be understood, recognized, and navigated with skill. The foundational concept is frame control. Every interaction occurs within a psychological frame, an implicit shared understanding of what this interaction is about, what the rules are, what the stakes are, and whose perspective defines reality. The person who establishes and maintains the frame controls the direction and outcome of the interaction. Most people never consciously think about frames. They walk into conversations and unconsciously accept whatever frame has already been established. The meeting called to discuss a problem implicitly frames one person as the problem solver and positions others as observers or contributors. The negotiation initiated by one party implicitly frames the other as a respondent. The person who defines what success looks like at the beginning of a conversation implicitly shapes how every subsequent exchange is evaluated. Strategic frame control does not mean being controlling or aggressive. It means being intentional. You establish the emotional tone of the interaction before others do. You define what is being solved and why it matters in terms that serve a genuinely good outcome. You maintain your interpretation of events with quiet consistency, neither arguing against alternative framings nor abandoning your own under social pressure. Status signaling is the second major dimension of social power. Human beings are continuously reading and broadcasting status signals through body language, vocal patterns, behavioral choices, and social habits. These signals are largely unconscious, but they carry enormous weight in determining how others respond to you. High-status behavioral signals include speaking at a measured, unhurried pace with strategic moments of silence, taking up appropriate physical space with a relaxed, open posture, responding to questions thoughtfully rather than defensively, maintaining selective attention rather than trying to acknowledge and please everyone equally. These behaviors do not require authority or privilege. They require practice and conscious intention. Low-status signals, by contrast, include hurried or apologetic speech, physically contracting posture, anxious agreement, and the desperate quality of trying to earn social acceptance in real time. The crucial insight is that status is not simply detected, but performed, and to a significant extent, others assign you whatever status you consistently perform. Coalition building is the third dimension of social power. Very little of what matters in human, social, and professional environments is accomplished through individual effort alone. The ability to build genuine mutual benefit alliances, to understand what different people need and show how your goals align with those needs, is arguably more important than any individual skill or capability. Effective coalition building requires genuinely customizing your approach to different motivational profiles. The person motivated primarily by recognition needs to see how supporting your initiative will make them look good. The person motivated by security needs to understand how your proposal reduces rather than increases their risk. The person motivated by growth needs to see what learning or expansion the initiative offers. These are not manipulative framings of the same pitch. They are genuine acknowledgments that different people have different legitimate interests. Influence currency is the final concept in this chapter, and it may be the most practically valuable. In social and professional environments, influence operates like an economy. Credibility, goodwill, access to information, control over resources, these are all currencies that accumulate over time through behavior and deplete through requests. People who understand this manage their influence portfolios strategically. They accumulate more than they spend during normal periods. They understand which currencies have highest value in specific contexts. They invest in long-term deposits rather than pursuing short-term withdrawals. The most sustainable social power is not seized. It is built consistently through the compound interest of demonstrated competence, genuine generosity, and consistent integrity. Decision-making under pressure. Pressure changes the brain. Not metaphorically, literally, neurologically, measurably. Under conditions of high stress or perceived threat, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for complex planning, nuanced judgment, and long-term perspective, loses resources as blood flow and neurochemical activation shift toward the faster, more instinctive systems of the midbrain and limbic regions. The brain optimizes for speed and survival. It deprioritizes accuracy and wisdom. This is why people make decisions under pressure that they later cannot fully explain. Why experienced professionals say things in heated conversations that violate everything they believe about how they want to communicate. Why the choice that seemed obviously correct in the urgent moment turns out, in calmer retrospect, to have been the worst available option. Understanding this shift is the first step to countering it. The second step is preloading your automatic responses. If the brain under pressure shifts from deliberative thinking to pattern recognition, the answer is to ensure that the patterns available for recognition are high quality. This means identifying the types of pressure situations you are likely to face, working through the optimal responses to those situations in advance, and rehearsing those responses until they are encoded at the level of trained reflex rather than conscious deliberation. Elite athletes do not figure out how to perform under pressure during competition. They train their responses so thoroughly that performance under pressure becomes automatic. The same principle applies to high-stakes conversations, difficult decisions, and any situation where the stakes are real and the clock is running. The second major change under pressure is attentional narrowing. Under stress, your field of attention contracts around the perceived primary threat or opportunity. This is useful when the situation genuinely requires intense singular focus. It becomes dangerous when the optimal decision requires holding multiple variables in view simultaneously. Complex negotiations, multi-stakeholder decisions, relationship conflicts with overlapping causes. These situations punish tunnel vision. The counter strategy is systematic. Before entering high-stakes situations, create explicit checklists of the factors you commit to considering regardless of where your attention wants to go. Under pressure, attention management requires structure that you establish in advance, because in the moment, the narrowed spotlight of stressed attention does not want to be redirected. The third change is loss aversion amplification. Under normal conditions, most people weight potential losses approximately twice as heavily as equivalent gains. Under pressure, this asymmetry intensifies. The possibility of a bad outcome can become so salient that it crowds out consideration of the possibilities for a genuinely good one. Recognizing this bias does not eliminate it, but it creates enough metacognitive distance to insert a deliberate question. Am I making this decision based on what I genuinely want to achieve, or based on what I am most desperate to avoid? Those two orientations produce systematically different choices, and under pressure, the avoidance orientation is almost always overrepresented. The fourth change is time horizon compression. Decisions that would feel different evaluated over a month or a year are made as if only the next hour matters. Choices that require short-term sacrifice for long-term benefit feel unacceptable when the long-term has become invisible. Solutions that resolve the immediate crisis while creating a larger future problem are adopted without registering their downstream costs. The solution is to build a simple time horizon question into every high-pressure decision process. Before committing to a choice, ask, how will I evaluate this decision in 30 days? In 6 months? In 5 years? Not to delay the decision indefinitely, but to expand the temporal frame just enough for the actual costs and benefits to be visible. Pressure protocols are the practical application of everything above. A basic protocol might involve 3 slow, deliberate breaths before any response to an escalating situation. A brief internal question about what type of decision is actually being faced. A check against predetermined criteria, rather than the emotional state of the moment. An explicit consideration of both potential gains and potential losses. A final pass against long-term values. Practiced consistently in lower-stakes situations, these protocols become available when the stakes are high and the time is short. Advanced pattern recognition in human behavior. There is a difference between watching people and seeing them. Most people watch. They notice what is happening on the surface of behavior, the words, the obvious emotions, the stated reasons. But beneath the surface, there are patterns, deep, stable, repetitive structures in how each person responds to the world that render their behavior far more predictable than it appears from the surface level. Developing the ability to see these patterns rather than just watch behavior is the highest order skill in human psychology. It is what allows some people to seem to understand others with almost supernatural accuracy. It is learnable, and the learning begins with knowing which patterns to look for. Stress response signatures are among the most stable and revealing patterns available. Every person has a characteristic way of responding when they feel genuinely threatened, overwhelmed, or pushed beyond their comfortable threshold. Some become directive and controlling, seeking to manage the environment as a substitute for managing their internal state. Some become relentlessly collaborative, involving others as a way of distributing the emotional weight. Some withdraw, needing space and silence to process internally before they can engage productively. Some externalize, talking through their internal landscape to anyone available. These signatures do not change significantly across contexts or relationships because they are not chosen responses. They are automatic ones, laid down early in development and reinforced through a lifetime of repetition. When you identify someone's stress signature, you know something about their fundamental architecture that their social persona often conceals. Motivation pattern recognition allows you to predict what someone will pursue, what they will sacrifice, what rewards will actually move them, and what losses they will fight hardest to prevent. The key is identifying the primary driver in the hierarchy of fundamental needs, because that primary driver functions as the organizing principle around which all other choices are implicitly arranged. Decision-making patterns reveal how someone processes information and reaches conclusions. Rapid, intuitive deciders rely on pattern recognition and become impatient with extended analysis. Deliberate, systematic deciders need comprehensive information and sufficient time and become unreliable under artificial time pressure. Some deciders are primarily logical, treating the decision as a calculation problem. Others are primarily relational, treating the decision as a question of how it will affect the people who matter. Understanding which pattern governs a specific person allows you to present information in the format that actually reaches them and make requests at the timing that actually works for their process. Communication patterns reflect how someone most naturally receives and integrates information. Visual processors understand and retain information organized as spatial relationships, diagrams, and images. Auditory processors benefit most from verbal explanation and discussion. Kinesthetic processors need to do something with information before they fully own it, engaging with it through experience, experiment, or movement. Speaking fluently in someone's native cognitive language produces dramatically higher comprehension and retention than delivering information in whatever format is easiest for you to provide. Relational patterns describe how someone characteristically relates to different categories of people. Their stance toward authority, their orientation to peers as potential collaborators or potential competitors, their comfort with dependence versus independence, their default mode in conflict. These patterns persist across relationships with striking consistency because they are not responses to specific people, but expressions of internalized relational templates that were formed long before the current relationships existed. The integration of all 5 pattern dimensions produces something genuinely powerful, a behavioral model that allows you to predict not just what someone will do in situations you have directly observed, but how they will behave in contexts you have never seen them navigate. This is not certainty. Human beings are complex and capable of genuine growth and change, but it is a significant upgrade from the low-resolution picture most people carry of the people they interact with every day. Psychological triggers and automated response systems. The human mind is not only a general-purpose thinking machine, it is also a system of specialized automated responses that can be activated predictably and reliably by specific inputs. Understanding these automated systems is what separates people who navigate human behavior at an advanced level from people who operate through guesswork and hope. The systems are not hypothetical. They are biological. They were shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure, and they operate with a consistency that makes them, once understood, genuinely predictable. The commitment and consistency system creates psychological momentum around positions and promises. Once someone has taken a public stance, agreed to a request, or identified themselves as the kind of person who does a particular thing, their brain becomes motivated to maintain consistency with that position. The psychological discomfort of inconsistency, called cognitive dissonance, functions as an internal pressure system that pushes behavior back toward alignment with previous commitments. The practical application begins small. Micro-commitments that are genuinely aligned with larger objectives you want someone to pursue create psychological pathways toward those objectives. When someone agrees to something small and consistent with the larger direction, they begin writing an internal narrative that makes the larger direction feel natural rather than foreign. The social proof system short-circuits individual decision-making by substituting group behavior for personal analysis. In uncertain situations, observing what similar people have already done is a faster and often more reliable guide than working through the problem from scratch. The brain treats widespread behavior as evidence of correct behavior, and this inference is efficient enough to override contradictory logical analysis. Specific and credible social proof is dramatically more powerful than generic social proof. Many people have found this helpful. Produces weak activation. Over 40,000 people in situations very similar to yours have made this exact choice. And here is what they reported 6 months later. Produces strong activation because the brain's social proof system runs on perceived similarity and specificity. The authority and expertise system produces automatic deference to perceived knowledge in relevant domains. This system can be triggered by genuine expertise, visibly demonstrated. It can also be triggered by authority markers, signals that the brain has learned to associate with expertise even when direct evidence of competence is not available. Relevant credentials, confident and measured communication, visible past results, and validation from other recognized authorities all activate this system. The ethical application is ensuring that the expertise you invoke is real and relevant, that confidence reflects genuine competence rather than manufactured performance, and that people are being guided toward outcomes that genuinely serve them rather than simply being moved by the authority signal itself. The reciprocity and obligation system creates a felt sense of debt following the receipt of value. This system evolved because reciprocal exchange was the foundation of cooperative societies, and humans who failed to honor their obligations were excluded from the cooperative networks their survival depended on. The compulsion to repay is deeply embedded and produces effects that are disproportionate to the size of the original gift, particularly when that gift was unexpected and personally meaningful. The scarcity and loss aversion system assigns higher value to things that are rare, limited, or in danger of becoming unavailable, and weighs the prospect of losing something already held more heavily than the prospect of gaining something equivalent. Genuine scarcity communicated honestly is not manipulation. It is accurate information about the world that people deserve to have. The ethical line is between communicating real constraints and manufacturing artificial ones. The liking and similarity system dramatically reduces psychological resistance when it is active. People who feel genuine affinity toward you process your ideas and requests with fundamentally less defensive filtering. This system is activated by real commonalities, genuine interest in the other person as a person, consistent warmth, and the sense that you are in the interaction for both of you, rather than only for yourself. The thread connecting all 6 systems is this: they are most powerful, most ethical, and most sustainable when they operate in service of genuine mutual benefit. When you use them to move people toward outcomes that serve their real interests, you are working with human psychology in its most natural mode. When you use them to serve yourself at others' expense, you create short-term compliance and long-term resistance, the most expensive trade in any human relationship. building psychological resilience and mental fortitude. Resilience is not a personality trait, it is a skill set. This distinction matters more than almost anything else you could understand about psychological strength. Treating resilience as a fixed characteristic, something you either have or do not have, leaves people passive in the face of their own vulnerability. Understanding it as a learnable capability opens the possibility of genuine development, regardless of where you currently stand. The foundation of psychological resilience is cognitive flexibility, the capacity to shift between mental frameworks as circumstances require, rather than remaining locked into a single interpretation of a situation. Rigidity, psychological or otherwise, breaks under sufficient pressure. Flexibility distributes and absorbs the force rather than concentrating it. Cognitive flexibility begins with perspective scaling. When something goes wrong, the most unhelpful thing the mind can do is treat the experience as both maximal and permanent. Perspective scaling is the deliberate practice of asking, how will this matter in 1 week, in 1 month, in 1 year, in 5 years? Most of what feels catastrophic in the immediate moment does not survive contact with this question. The question does not diminish genuine difficulty. It reintroduces proportion. Interpretation. Flexibility extends this further. Every situation contains multiple legitimate interpretations, and the interpretation you inhabit determines your emotional state, your behavioral options, and your trajectory forward. A rejection can be evidence of inadequacy or evidence of misalignment, or information redirecting you toward better opportunities. All three interpretations can be plausible from the same facts. The resilient mind does not simply accept the first interpretation that arrives. It generates options and selects the one that is most accurate and most useful. Emotional regulation mastery is not about emotional suppression. It is about developing the capacity to recognize emotional states early, understand what they are communicating, and consciously shift towards states that enhance performance rather than degrade it. Strong emotions are not enemies of clear thinking. They are sources of energy and information. The question is whether that energy is channeled toward useful ends or dissipated in reactive patterns. Identity independence is one of the most important and most difficult aspects of genuine resilience. Most people's sense of self-worth is partially or substantially tied to external circumstances, professional success, others' approval, social status, financial position. When those external anchors shift, as they inevitably do, the identity shifts with them, and the psychological instability that follows is proportional to the degree of dependence. Developing identity independence means building a stable sense of self that is anchored not in what you achieve or how others evaluate you, but in your values, your character, and your relationship with your own integrity. This does not mean indifference to outcomes or immunity to disappointment. It means that your fundamental psychological foundation remains steady when the surface of your life is turbulent. Control focus is the practice of directing attention and energy exclusively toward factors within your sphere of genuine influence, and releasing, not suppressing, but genuinely releasing, attachment to outcomes that are fundamentally beyond your power to determine. This sounds simple. It is one of the most demanding psychological disciplines in existence, but the emotional and cognitive resources freed by genuine release of uncontrollable concerns are enormous, and their reallocation toward actually influenceable factors produces results that feel almost disproportionate. Meaning-making capability determines whether difficult experiences become defining wounds or formative chapters. Human beings do not simply experience events. They interpret them, and those interpretations become part of the story through which they understand themselves and their lives. Resilient people are not people to whom nothing bad happens. They are people who have developed skill in finding genuine meaning and constructive significance in the difficult experiences that happen to everyone. Support network activation acknowledges the simple truth that human beings are not designed to maintain resilience in isolation. We are social creatures who require connection, perspective, and genuine support from others to sustain psychological function under extended stress. Resilient people cultivate those networks during good periods because networks built in crisis are far thinner than networks built in ordinary time. Adaptation acceleration is the capacity to rapidly assess changing conditions, identify what the new landscape requires, acquire what is needed, and adjust strategy and approach accordingly. Resilience is not resistance to change. It is skill in navigating it. Long-term behavioral change and habit psychology. Most people approach behavioral change like a willpower contest. They decide they are going to be different. They generate motivation. They try very hard for a period. Then life intervenes. The motivation depletes. The old patterns reassert themselves, and the experience of failure adds itself to a growing file of evidence about why lasting change is so difficult. The vast majority of meaningful changes attempted through this mechanism fail, not because the people are weak, because they are fighting the wrong battle. The brain is built for automation. Frequently repeated behaviors get encoded into neural pathways that, over time, run automatically with minimal cognitive overhead. This is how the brain manages the extraordinary complexity of human life. We do not consciously choose to breathe or to maintain our balance while walking, or to recognize faces. Those operations became automatic through repetition and released the conscious resources to focus on novel challenges. The same automation system applies to every behavior you repeat consistently, and the key insight is this: it does not discriminate between behaviors that serve you and behaviors that do not. The automation encodes whatever you repeatedly do, whatever the consequences. Understanding the habit loop is the starting point for working with this system rather than against it. Every habit is structured as a three-part cycle: a cue that triggers the behavior, the routine behavior itself, and a reward that reinforces the neural pathway and increases the probability of repetition. Most people focus exclusively on the routine, the behavior they want to change, while ignoring the cue that initiates it and the reward that sustains it. Changing the routine without addressing the cue and reward produces temporary change at best. Cue design is the first practical step. What specific trigger initiates the behavior you want to change? What environmental, emotional, temporal, or social signal is the brain using as the starting gun? For desired new behaviors, what existing consistent event in your daily life can serve as the anchor cue for the new routine? The most reliable cues are specific and consistent. Vague intentions to do this more often are not cues. Immediately after I pour my morning coffee is a cue. Routine design at the beginning of habit formation should be almost insultingly small. The research is consistent and unambiguous. Consistency of behavior matters far more than intensity of behavior in the formation of lasting habits. An action taken every single day for 30 days encodes more strongly than the same action taken at full intensity 3 times a week with skip days in between. Starting small, genuinely small, removes the motivation requirement. You are not relying on enthusiasm or discipline. You are relying on a behavior that requires almost no effort and therefore encounters almost no resistance. Reward optimization requires understanding the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic rewards. External rewards, points, treats, social recognition can be useful for initiating new habits, but they create dependency on continued external provision. The most durable habit rewards are intrinsic. the sense of accomplishment, the felt physical benefit, the alignment of behavior with values, the identity reinforcement of being someone who does this consistently. Identity alignment is the most powerful driver of lasting behavioral change, and it is almost universally overlooked. The most durable habits are not behaviors you force yourself to perform. They are expressions of who you genuinely believe you are. When the behavior becomes part of your identity, rather than an item on your behavioral agenda, the entire motivational structure changes. You are not doing the behavior to achieve an outcome. You are doing the behavior because it is what someone like you does. Environment design is the most underappreciated behavior change strategy available. The environment does not just respond to your behavior, it shapes it. Arrange your physical and informational environment to make desired behaviors easy and undesired behaviors difficult, and you reduce the friction cost of change dramatically. Your willpower is a finite daily resource. Environment design reduces the situations in which willpower is required. Implementation intentions prepare you for the inevitable disruptions that will occur to every habit routine. You decide in advance, specifically and concretely, how you will respond when you miss a day, when travel disrupts your routine, when illness intervenes. The research consistently shows that having a predetermined recovery plan dramatically increases long-term consistency, and because the disruption itself does not trigger the demoralizing spiral that usually ends habit formation attempts. The complete psychological mastery framework. Everything you have encountered in this book, the 3 hidden systems governing behavior, the 6 invisible forces behind decisions, the language of the body and face, the architecture of genuine influence, the prediction of behavioral patterns, the management of emotional states, the defense against manipulation, the science of persuasion, the dynamics of social power, the psychology of pressure, the skill of pattern recognition, the automation of beneficial behaviors, all of it converges here into a single integrated framework for living and leading with psychological mastery. This framework has 7 levels. Level 1 is strategic awareness, the foundational shift from operating on autopilot to operating with conscious understanding of the psychological dynamics present in every human interaction. Strategic awareness means entering a conversation with genuine curiosity about the psychological state of the other person, not as a clinical assessment, but as an authentic interest in what is actually happening beneath the surface of what is being said. It means maintaining simultaneous awareness of what is happening for them, what is happening for you, and what the interaction itself is doing to the space between you. Level 2 is interaction design. Instead of hoping that important conversations will naturally produce good outcomes, you take responsibility for creating the conditions that make good outcomes possible. This begins before the interaction starts, with understanding what you genuinely want to accomplish, what the other person's priorities and concerns likely are, and what approach is most likely to serve both simultaneously. It continues during the interaction through real-time monitoring of psychological dynamics and flexible adjustment based on what you are actually observing rather than what you expected. Level 3 is influence orchestration, the systematic application of psychological principles to create outcomes that genuinely serve everyone involved, identifying someone's primary motivations, framing proposals in terms of their real values and concerns, providing genuine value before making requests, building trust through consistency and demonstrated competence, creating social proof that supports rather than contradicts their decision-making process, understanding when someone is psychologically ready for a decision and when they need more time or information. Level 4 is relationship architecture, the conscious development and maintenance of relationships that become more valuable to all parties over time. not as a transactional exercise, but as a genuine long-term investment in human connections that provide mutual support, growth, and meaning. Understanding what different people need from relationships and providing it sustainably. Preventing common sources of resentment and conflict through clear communication and appropriate boundaries. Building genuine trust through the consistent alignment of stated values and actual behavior. Level 5 is systematic influence. The development of processes, reputation, and networks that extend your positive impact beyond what you can accomplish through individual interactions. Every piece of genuine value you create, every relationship you invest in, every instance of demonstrated integrity becomes part of an influence infrastructure that compounds over time and generates effects that reach far beyond your direct presence. Level 6 is psychological leadership, the highest expression of influence as it operates in groups and organizations. People who inspire voluntary followership do so not through authority or charisma, but through consistent demonstration of competence that matters to others, decisions that genuinely consider and honor the interests of the group, and the kind of integrity that makes what someone says and what someone does reliably the same thing. This is leadership that people choose rather than accept, and it is the most powerful and durable form of social influence that exists. Level 7 is legacy creation, the application of psychological mastery in service of purposes that extend beyond immediate personal interests. The most meaningful use of a deep understanding of human behavior is not achieving better outcomes for yourself, though that naturally follows. It is contributing to better outcomes for others, for communities, for institutions, for the future. When the capabilities developed through genuine psychological mastery are applied to significant problems and important work, they create impact that outlasts the moment and the person. The arc of this framework is a movement from reaction to strategy, from confusion to clarity, from being influenced to being genuinely influential, from operating unconsciously to operating with full awareness of the forces at work in every human interaction. This does not make you a manipulator. It makes you a more honest, more capable, more genuinely helpful human being. Because psychological blindness is not innocence. It is not humility. It is a limitation that costs you and everyone who interacts with you the possibility of the most clear, honest, and mutually beneficial human connection available. Understanding the human mind does not distance you from people. It brings you closer to them because you can finally see them clearly. Not the performance they present to the world, not the version filtered through your own projections and assumptions, but the actual human being underneath, with their real fears and genuine desires and hidden strengths and private struggles. And when you can truly see another person, something remarkable becomes possible. Not just influence, not just strategic advantage, but genuine connection, the kind that changes what both people are capable of together. That is the ultimate destination of everything in this book. Not power over others, power with others. Not the ability to control human behavior, but the ability to understand it well enough to contribute something real to the lives of the people you encounter. The patterns are visible now. The language is available. The framework is in place. The only thing left is to begin.